attending today.
Thank
So
you.
I will start with Atlas Ingebrigtsen, Chambliss, Cummings.
Here.
Okay, Cummings.
Here.
Thank you. Johnson,
Here.
Lilligren, Lindstrom,
Here.
Musset,
Here.
Vento,
Here.
Wolf.
Here.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. Thanks for that reminder. We have a quorum. The next item on the agenda, the minutes from our January 19th meeting. Is there a motion to approve, please?
Vento moves approval of the minutes.
Thank
Wolf
you. Is there a
seconds.
second? Thank you, council members. Any discussion, additions, corrections on the minutes? Any discussion? Hearing none, Michelle, please call the roll on the motion.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Atlas Ingebrigtsen, Chambliss, Cummings,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Musset,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. That item carries. And moving on to our business agenda, we have one item on consent, the City of Forest Lake Headwaters 123 Comprehensive Plan Amendment. It's considered non-controversial and routine. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda, please?
Vento moves approval.
Wolf
Thank
seconds.
you. Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion. Hearing none, Michelle, before I ask you to call roll, I'll just say nice to see you, Molly. I think this is the first time I've actually seen you since you've been
In
away.
a couple
so-
months.
Yeah, welcome. Seeing no further discussion on the motion, Michelle, please call the roll.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Atlas Ingebrigtsen, Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Musset,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, who was that last either? Okay. That item carries. Thank you. Thanks, Michelle. And we will move on to our non-consent agenda. And that item is 2021-32. It's the addition to the 2021 project-based voucher award recommendations. And Terry Smith is here to present. Welcome, Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Terry Smith. I'm the Director of the Council's Housing and Redevelopment Authority. You will recall a project-based voucher award at the January 13th council meeting where the council approved the award of 81 project-based vouchers to 6 different projects. I'm here today with some embarrassment as we missed one project during that presentation. It really was just a case of moving too fast with tight timelines. And so I'm requesting today your approval to add one project and 4 PBVs to the list of awardees. Although they were very gracious with our oversight, I want to make a public apology to Sand Companies, who have been a long-term PBV partner of the Metro HRA. So with that, I will go to the next slide, Greg. So as you will recall, hopefully from my earlier January presentation, the Metro HRA issued a request for proposals and offered up to 200 project-based vouchers. That RFP was issued May 21st. As a result, we received 24 applications representing 321 PBV units. Proposals were ranked according to the criteria shown on this slide, and none of this information is different from my previous presentation. Next slide, please. The RFP outlined additional provisions, so we were able to coordinate with Minnesota Housing in their consolidated RFP. Essentially, we provided letters of intent to project owners that awarded the PBVs formally if they were to receive all their financing during 2020 or by the end of 2020. 13 projects representing 196 PBVs received these letters of intent, and that includes the sand company development I'm going to talk about today. 6 projects or 81 units were awarded by the council on January 13th, and today I'm recommending one additional project with 4 PBVs. Next slide, please. So this is a chart that you saw at the January 13th council meeting or the CDC meeting before that. So the top 6 were formally awarded by you all by council action on January 13th. And I'm recommending in addition to for Balsam 2 apartments in Dayton, it's a 48 unit new construction development and we're requesting 4 PBVs for that project. So we initially awarded 81 PBVs and I'm making a revision today to make that 85. Next slide, please. So the project is called Balsam 2. It's in Dayton. It's a 48 unit new construction development that includes 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. The 4 PBVs will serve broad low income households. The project goal is to meet the housing needs generated by the increase in people moving to the area for jobs, new and expanding employers, and then the proximity to the core cities. 9 units will contain housing supports for households experiencing homelessness or households living with disabilities. And intense on-site services will be provided by Simpson Housing for the specialized populations. This project was awarded Minnesota Housing tax credits this round, and the city of Dayton also committed some, leveraged some community development block grant funds to acquire the land. Next slide, please. So the next steps, if you approve this recommendation tonight, it'll go on to the full council approval. Once approved, we will enter into an agreement to enter into a housing assistance payments contract. And that's a contract that commits the project-based vouchers during the construction period. Once construction is near completion and the units pass housing quality standards or meet health and safety inspection requirements, we will enter into a contract for 20 years to begin making payments on behalf of low-income families. Next slide. And so the action before you today is that the Metropolitan Council approve the award of project-based vouchers, rent assistance, and authorize the Metro HRA Director to execute the necessary documents with the project owners for the following project. Balsam 2 in Dayton, total 48 units and 4 project-based vouchers. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Smith, for your work on this. And just to add to the apology to the sand companies, and I'm glad we're able to correct this mistake in a timely manner. So any questions on that report, committee members? Questions? And I can't necessarily see you right now, so if you have a question, please just speak up. I am hearing no questions. So Ms. Smith has proposed the action that the Met Council approve the award of these project-based vouchers. Is there a motion to approve, please?
Mr. Chair, Johnson moves to approve.
Thank you, Councilmember. Is there a second?
Lindstrom seconds.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any discussion on the motion?
Mr. Chair.
Discussion. Yeah, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you. I am super excited because on this list now there are 2 apartments that will be receiving project-based vouchers from the Met Council in my district. And of course, I'm always about the region, but to see this one from Dayton come through is also very cool. I know the city has worked hard on providing affordability, and the fact that they, got the land secured and worked with sand companies is great. I know in my many years at the local level, I worked with sand companies on, I think, 2 different neighborhoods developments in Plymouth, and they are just great partners and doing really good work, solid, great neighborhoods for people once they move into the apartments. So I just commend everybody, and thanks, Terry, for getting this one on the list. Better late than never.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion on the motion? Discussion. Hearing none, Michelle, please call the roll.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Atlas Ingebrigtsen,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings, Johnson,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Lucet,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion is adopted. And we'll move on to our information items today. The first is the 2021 Livable Communities Act program criteria discussion, ongoing discussion, and I will welcome and recognize Tara Beard. Ms. Beard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening. Good evening, council members. We are going to talk today about the two parts of our January 19th conversation we weren't really able to get to due to the really rich, wonderful conversation around the equity criteria. So today we're going to talk about some TOD eligibility and then talk about funding amounts that we want to make available in 2021. Next slide, please. So as I just summarized, we'll start with a timeline, talk about the blue line extension and any changes we want to make to TOD eligibility, and then the 2021 program schedule and funding availability. Next slide, please, Greg. So here's the timeline. I've shown this in all of our conversations, and this just sort of reflects that we are having an additional conversation today rather than me as originally planned coming with a recommendation to approve final program criteria and funding amounts. So that will become what we do on February 16th. I'll be coming to you with final program criteria and scoring criteria and funding amounts, asking for or recommending you all approve that to go on to council for February 24th. Next slide, please. So the first part of the conversation today, again, as I mentioned, is around 2021 LCDA-TOD eligible areas. And this slide is showing the 2020 LCDA-TOD eligible areas, which can include station areas around light rail transit, bus rapid transit, high frequency bus, commuter rail, and even some park and rides. So I'm showing you this map because you can see the blue line, and it's represented by a blue line, and moving from the central city down is, of course, the formerly known as Hiawatha line, and the blue line moving toward the northwest from the central city is the blue line extension that has experienced some changes this year. So we'll go to the next slide and talk about that. As you all are probably more familiar with than me, there have been some changes to the blue line extension related to the ability to acquire land in kind of the middle section of the line. And so that kind of brings forward some considerations about whether or not proposed station areas, as were eligible last year for the blue line, should remain eligible this year. So we know that the project's moving forward without using approximately 8 miles of freight railroad property. And if we move, that's represented by the yellow line you see on the slide. And if we go to the next slide, you can kind of see that broken out in kind of 3 sections, so we can kind of further parse out kind of where there's sort of relevant conversation here. And I just want to thank my colleague, Stephen Klimek. He actually created these slides and made these great graphics to help understand kind of the criteria. So for Area 1 to the north, you see there, the current alignment and stations along West Broadway could be preserved. There's no impacts directly because of the BSNF land changes or inability to acquire land from them or work with them on land. So that area to the north in the light yellow, we're not expecting changes. Changes could happen, but there isn't a sort of a known change to that area. Area 2 is exactly kind of where a big stretch of that BSNF line is, but project stakeholders have identified nearby Botno Boulevard as a potential focus for initial analysis for maybe some reconfiguring of the line. And basically what that means is that there could be some shifting here or there, but given the ability to look at Botno Boulevard as an alternate area, you know, the actual location of station areas and the impact of transit-oriented development in that area still could remain fairly reasonable to consider, even if we don't know exactly where the stations will go. And then that lower light blue area, area 3, has a lot of potential routes, and some in-depth engagement and analysis is needed. But there are a couple station areas in there that overlap with station areas for, I believe it's the C line, that keep some portions of that blue area in eligibility regardless of the blue line extension. Next slide, please. So given that sort of situation, staff has been discussing kind of options for that, for the blue line extension for 2021. We did talk with our colleagues at Hennepin County, who administer a transit-oriented development grant program as well. And they are going to keep the existing station areas for the blue line extension as eligible areas in their program. And that is, I think, you know, if you're asking staff recommendation, that's what I think staff would probably recommend for a couple of reasons. But before I go into that, let me talk a little bit about the eligibility or the options we have. So we could maintain eligibility of the entire blue line extension and use the previously eligible station areas as of 2020. As I mentioned, that is what Hennepin County will be doing with their TOD program. We could remove the 7 stations in area 2. That's the area in the middle where we expect Botno Boulevard could, you know, make up for some of the lost area, but we don't have any guarantees, of course. And then in the additional ones in area 3, because we no longer sort of have certainty of exactly where those stations would be. Another option would be to remove the entire blue line extension from eligibility until it's completed environmental review or received a record of decision. And that is sort of addressing the fact that normally we don't pull station areas into TOD eligibility until there's been a record of decision. And so there was for the blue line extension. And so those areas became eligible. You know, one could certainly argue that now that we have to kind of go back and do additional environmental review to come up with a new record of decision, that technically we could say that extension is no longer eligible. I will mention we have never received or awarded any blue line extension applications through the TOD program. But I do know that, you know, there's still a lot of interest in that line and desire to continue to figure out what the best transit option is in that corridor moving forward. Let's see. So I neglected to say something I meant to say at the very beginning. I was supposed to say at the very beginning, which is that for all the other areas, we are recommending using pre-pandemic ridership numbers. Just because of how pandemic has impacted ridership, some areas beyond the blue line and the blue line extension could potentially be removed from TOD given our past kind of criteria for activity at a station area to justify. We sort of feel like the pandemic is a unique enough situation and we don't know exactly how that's going to play out in the future, that it would be a little bit rash to maybe jump to removing those TOD areas that very well could rebound and become very popular in the next year or two again. So we are also making that recommendation that we use pre-pandemic ridership levels to determine TOD eligibility, which would mirror the 2020 eligibility, with the exception of this blue line extension conversation. So I'm going to stop here and ask for questions or feedback on what I've presented so far.
Thanks, Ms. Beard. Any questions, comments at this point, committee members?
Mr. Chair?
Looks like
Yeah,
Council
Councilmember
Member
Lindstrom.
Atlas Ingebrigtsen has her hand raised too.
Oh, thanks, Michelle. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you. I just wonder, one of the things I wonder about is I appreciate the idea of not removing stops due to the pandemic, and we don't know what's happening. However, I do wonder about paying attention to areas where there is, especially along this corridor, where there's dependency. So I just wonder if that could be an aspect of information that we pay attention to and look to, where maybe in other communities we have had a decreased ridership, but we might have seen, for example, some of our routes get more utilization comparatively to others in the region, in this corridor in particular. I just wonder if that's something to look for and stay aware of. is demand popping back here faster, which would speak to the need, of course, for the project. I also like the idea of staying as congruent with the county as possible along this, and acknowledge that this is a region who has dealt with historic inequities as it relates to development and support. And I think this is a time for our organization to lean into those populations that have been harder and disproportionately hit, and mindful of that. But so more comments, I guess, and an idea than a question, but I'm happy to hear feedback on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Alice Ingebrigtsen. And to the first part, your question, I don't know if is there anyone in here that can speak to the sort of what we're seeing in ridership. I mean, I know a little because I serve on the transportation policy work group, and just the fascinating things we're learning about ridership. I mean, during the pandemic, it's going to be some great data to help us analyze the use, the interest, the need of transit, the things that you were bringing up, Councilmember Alice Ingebrigtsen. I don't know that it's fully useful as of this point, but again, I'm not an expert in this, so I don't want to pretend I am one. Ms. Beard or anyone, do you have a response for Councilmember Chambliss?
Yeah, I have a response. I have not heard in our presentations from Met Council transportation staff that there are some routes that have significantly increased. Although I'm really curious about an analysis of the dependencies on certain routes, whether they are receiving the proper service or not. So I'd be interested in hearing back from staff on that as well. And then as far as, I'm glad that you presented the three options as far as how we could look at the Blue Line extension options for the station areas, whether or not they should stay the same or change. Being a member of the Corridor Management Committee and Vice Chair of Transportation, the Corridor Management Committee has had a lot of discussion about trying to stay as closely aligned to the original alignment as possible, at least for section number 1, and also trying to align as closely as possible in section number 2. And not wanting to have to restart everything over, and honoring the engagement that has gone on before we had a stall.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember, for that information. And as a fellow member of the Extension Corridor Management Committee, and representing communities, I think in 2 of the areas, I agree with Councilmember Alice Ingebrigtsen and Chambliss. And these are partnership projects. Technically speaking, our preferred local alternative is in place until it's not anymore. And so we've engaged with our partners in some, robust conversations. Communities have expectations along this line, and we're trying to right-size our expectations to what's doable, what's possible. But until we know what those alternatives might be, I think it's best that we just stay with the county's approach and with the preferred local alternative as it stands. Thanks. Other comments or questions at this point for Ms. Beard?
Mr. Chair?
Other comments or questions? Yeah, is that you, Councilmember Lindstrom?
Yeah, sure is. Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Tara, could you go into a little bit more detail about why it would be, if you did have a staff recommendation, you said that would be the preferred recommendation. I'm curious to hear your insights on that.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Lindstrom, yeah, thanks. I think that I agree with Councilmember Alice Ingebrigtsen. Our staff agrees that being consistent with Hennepin County is really valuable. A lot of these projects apply for funding from both the Hennepin County and the Council TOD programs. And so as much consistency as possible. I think we also recognize that while we don't know exactly what the future holds, we know there's still a lot of interest and focus on this general area, this general corridor, being a transit corridor that could support TOD. It's already a pretty dense corridor, so I think that's sort of the short answer, I guess, if that's helpful.
It is. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I don't really, I mean, I get what you guys are all in agreement, but I don't really understand when we don't even know now what the timing of the project would be. I mean, there's no real idea of when we're going to have a new plan or how long it's going to take to get its environmental review and then to get funded after that. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to be funding projects specific to that line when we don't have any idea when it's going to be built. It's clear that it's got the votes to go the way you guys want, but it just really doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any further comments or questions at this point? Comments or questions? Hearing none, Ms. Beard.
All right, I think we are ready for our next slide. Well, let me just take stock real quick. So no other questions, generally getting feedback that feels supportive of staff's recommendation. Okay, thank you. Moving on then to the 2021 proposed schedule. And this is usually a pretty non-controversial slide, but there is kind of a little twist to 2021 that we are proposing that I just want you all to be aware of and certainly ask questions about. We are going to be recommending, and these slides are forthcoming, more money for pre-development than we have in the past. But we also want to be really careful that we don't put money in pre-development that then it can't be used for development if the interest isn't there. And so in the past, pre-development for the fall round has gone after the development rounds. And we're proposing that we do the fall round of pre-development funds a little bit earlier. They'd still be awarded in September in the fall, and do the development awards after that so that we can make our recommended increase in funding for pre-development available, but still have that money for the development program recommendations if it's not, if those programs are not oversubscribed or we don't get competitive applications for the pre-development. So I will stop there and see if there's any questions or concerns with that. I will share that we have certainly vetted this idea to some of our most frequent applicants, especially St. Paul, Minneapolis, they have a pre-development application, or they have an application process through their city for development programs and pre-development programs that has to occur prior to our awards as well. So as well as speaking with some developers and our own LCAC members who need to be present for the review process, the application review timeline. So we have reached out and haven't gotten any super concerning red flags, and so we want to try it this way, and curious what thoughts are.
Cool. Committee members, thoughts on this proposed schedule? Any thoughts?
This is Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, Councilmember Chambliss.
It works for me. That's all I got to say.
Sounds good. Same here, and I'm guessing silence here implies support. If I'm wrong, someone please let me know.
Chair, this is Councilmember Atlas Engebretson. I don't know that it's a protocol to use the thumbs up reaction, but I will verbalize that looks good.
Thanks. I appreciate the verbalization. Cool.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, committee members.
Yeah. Please.
Thank you. Yeah. Mainly wanted to make sure y'all were aware there was this slight change in case it is problematic or there is some unintended consequences, in which case, of course, we could change course for 2022 and go back to past processes. All right, next slide, please, Greg. All right, now we're getting to what I think at least is kind of the fun part, which is how much do we want to make available in 2021 across our LCA programs? And as you are probably aware, there are sort of base revenues available for these programs as they are set in the Livable Communities Act statute. And that amount is for TBRA, $5 million. And then LCDA is a tax capacity formula that for 2021 is estimated at 12.6 million. And for the local housing incentives account, there is a base revenue of 1.5 million. And so those are the amounts we start with and can certainly make available, and according to statute must make available for these programs. But if you recall last year around this time, we also talked about programmable reserves that we have. And at the most kind of simple level, there's sort of two types of reserves. Some reserves are relinquished dollars that were previously awarded, but the projects didn't end up materializing and the funding was either never allocated or it was returned. And those are funds that are restricted to the program from which they were returned. So we don't take money that was returned from an LCDA project and recommend that it get placed into the pot for TBRA in a future year. But there are also interest earnings that come from the significant number of LCDA or LCA dollars that sit in our bank accounts for some period of time. All the money doesn't go out the door the second it's awarded, of course, and that's a part of a bigger council process in terms of interest earnings. But with lots of help from the finance staff, we have essentially around $2 million. I'm sorry, we have essentially $5.5 million in unrestricted reserves that come from that kind of interest earnings pot. And I didn't highlight when talking about the restricted reserves, the amounts you see on the slide here that are available to program within each individual program. And then I also have a line where it says staff recommendation. And that is staff looking at past years of total funding availability. That is staff looking at kind of in discussion with finance and each other, reasonable amounts of reserves to keep in play so that we aren't, we have some sort of buffer for unexpected draw requests exceeding money received, et cetera. And just looking at what the subscription levels have been for programs over the year. And so what's likely to kind of be needed, but still allow for some competition and differentiation in the programs. So that's why those are sort of the high level reasons why you see a recommendation for an additional $1 million for TBRA, an additional $2.4 million for LCDA. And there are no restricted reserves available to LHIA, so no recommendation of those. But we do recommend using some of the unrestricted reserves for LHIA in the amount of $2.5 million. Next slide, please. Don't answer it. You can just take it downstairs, please. Thank you. Apologies. Our landline that rings once every 5 months is ringing, and my kids are wondering what to do with it. So I apologize for the ringing and for the side talk.
Thanks, Ms. Beard. Please don't apologize.
So digging a little deeper into these funding recommendations, let's start with TBRA. As the previous slide shows, there's a base revenue in 2021 of $5 million, and we're recommending an additional $1 million. That gives a total of $6 million, and we're recommending that $5.5 million of that go toward the traditional TBRA programs. That includes site investigation, that includes contamination cleanup, and that $500,000. So it would be, because TBRA is offered twice a year, $250,000 in the spring and $250,000 in the fall, available for the Seeding Equitable Environmental Development Program, funding availability has fluctuated a bit over the years as we have experienced generally a lot fewer applications and interest in that funding than we have made available in the past. So we did bring the available funding for that program down quite a bit last year, and interest about measured equal with what we made available last year, which was $250,000 for the entire year. Since there was increased interest, there was a lot of staff work that went into that increased interest, but we know that there was a strong interest in the council and the CDC to see if we could get more interest in the program. We are recommending making a little bit more available this year than we did last year, but those funds are allowed to be programmed into the TBRA program if there aren't competitive projects. So there is still flexibility even within these recommendations. Looking at the LCDA line, as I mentioned, the $12.6 million base revenue for 2021, and our recommendation of adding $2.4 million gets us to $15 million. And that would be the staff recommendation is to put 10 million of that into the LCDA program, the Livable Communities Demonstration Account, and 5 million into LCDA-TOD, Transit Oriented Development, which is consistent with the funding that's been made available for TOD in years past. For local housing incentives account, as I mentioned, 1.5 in base revenue, a recommendation to add 2.5 million to that for a recommended total of 4 million, about $500,000 less than the record funding available we made last year, but we also have a little bit less in reserves this year than we did last year when we made that decision, and so that would total $4 million in the LHIA bucket. And I'll also add that the management committee will be considering additional supplanting of strategic initiatives funding for local housing incentives account. So I will be at that management committee also requesting or looking for any interest in that source of funding to also contribute to LHIA, but 4 million would be what would be coming from what we have in the base revenues and the restricted reserves, or the unrestricted reserves, I'm sorry, for LHIA. So that's a lot. I want to just pause there and see if folks have any questions or comments or feedback on these.
Thanks, Tara. Questions, comments on what Ms. Beard has presented?
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tara, how much then and I know you probably said it, but so how much then do we at least keep in our reserves for that, need should it arise? I missed that after all the staff recommended allocations.
Sure, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson. So we're looking at for TBRA 2 million in reserves. We're recommending we program 1 million of that, leaving 1 million remaining. For LCDA, there is 8.1 million in reserves, and we're recommending programming 2.4 of that. So what does that leave us with? 6.7, is that right? Is my math right? Sorry about that. And, LCDA, that is the most, the highest number in reserves would be that 6+ million in LCDA, but that's actually quite a bit lower than we've traditionally ever kept in reserves for LCDA. And we do like to know that there is funding that will carry from year to year because for new initiatives, for new ideas, things like the SEED program. So not kind of depleting these to the bare minimum can be really helpful in making changes in the future and exploring kind of new programs and innovation in the future. And then for LHIA, we don't have any restricted reserves. So there's none now, and there won't be any. With the unrestricted reserves, there's 5.5 million available. And if y'all agree with staff recommendation of programming 2.5 million into LHIA, that would leave 3 million left in there, which would be significantly less than we've left in the past.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one quick follow-up. I know, Tara, you're comparing it with years past, which is great. I mean, that's the data points. With the crazy development market right now, and it looks like, based on our own permit data that we've put out there, are we seeing an uptick in, affordable developments taking place given the market where it's at? I've heard that there is. So, as we look back, but as we're trying to also see around the corner, are we sensing that there might be a surge this coming year at all from the development community as far as affordability?
Ms. Beard?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, if by all accounts, looking at years past and our own just sort of, relationships with developers and communities across the region, it's really hard to even come up with a number that we think wouldn't be able to be put into affordable housing projects. Even in the management committee meeting that I will be at next week, trying to say, well, how much should we ask for? Could we program all that 3.9 million in strategic funds toward LHIA and get it all out the door? And the answer is absolutely yes. So there not only is so much need, but there are so many projects in the pipeline that do not get funded each year and come back for more. I have no qualms about being able to program any amount of dollars, frankly, you put into LHIA.
Councilmember Johnson?
Mr. Chair, can I just one quick follow-up?
Yeah, of course, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Tara. That helps me get a gauge at where you guys are at. And then if a really good project came forward and we were short, can we on the fly, although that's probably not a great government term, but as we move through the process, through the public process, is there a way that if we really wanted to tap a little bit more of that money to get something across the finish line that we could?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, that is it's a question that probably has a different answer if we're talking about LCDA, which, as you know, also funds quite a few affordable housing projects, versus LHIA, just because they go through those separate processes, one being in-house and one being through the Minnesota Housing Consolidated RFP. But I know as a part of a competitive process, the projects certainly would need to be vetted at the same time and using the same criteria. But for example, this year when y'all had made $4.5 million in LHIA available this year, and then we found, we found need to program that $1 million intended for transitional housing that we weren't able to program, to get out there the way we had intended. Like working quickly with you all to add that funding to the LHIA pot allowed us to fund an additional program. So if I understand your question correctly, I think, given some, parameters about it still needing to be something, a project that applied through the process and got scored and scored higher than other projects that aren't getting funded, I believe the answer is yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Lindstrom, and then Councilmember Cummings.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Tara, keep it simple for me. If this staff recommendation moves forward, would this be the most ever allocated for livable communities?
I think, I don't think so. Sorry, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Lindstrom. I believe there was a banner year a while back where a really large amount was made available for LCDA for some specific reasons. I can't remember why, so I apologize, but it would certainly be I think the increase in what we would make available for LCDA in 2021, if you follow staff recommendations, would compensate for the $500,000 less in LHIA. So my guess is, dollars to donuts, it's very, very comparable to last year's recommendation, last year's funding availability.
Thank you. And I was just wondering if maybe Director Barajas had any further sort of archival knowledge about how this compares to other years. Lisa?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Lisa Barajas, Community Development Director. Tara's right, there was a banner year back right around the start of the TOD program. There was a very large pot of reserves, and I can't recall if it was unrestricted or restricted at that time to the LCDA program, but we had done a big reconciliation project and had a whole bunch of turnbacks that had been sitting in that pot. And so they were all programmed in a given year, basically to kick off the TOD program as we approached adjusting our levy over future years.
Thank you. Anything else, Councilmember Lindstrom?
No, thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm curious, Tara, you mentioned that the SEED program, we've talked about that before, not having a tremendous amount of interest, and I'm wondering what we're doing to spread the word about the program and encourage further application for those funds.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cummings, that's a great question. The TBRA program officer, Marcus Martin, did a lot more outreach than normal than last year, and it was a significant effort to reach out to communities with areas of concentrated poverty, which is where SEED dollars are focused, and even expanding out to the development community to some extent as well, to let them know that this funding was available to kind of broaden the conversation and understand more about the interest. I will be frank, we are still working as staff to do the analysis and bring the conversation to you all about the SEED program more broadly and whether or not it is achieving what it is meant to achieve and if it is the best program designed to achieve what it's meant to achieve. It's simply been a matter of kind of which priorities and analysis and evaluation can we get to first. But I very much expect in 2022 for us, or I'm sorry, in 2021 for us to do some more significant research into the outcomes we want to see from SEED, whether or not the last 5 years of SEED programming has achieved those outcomes, and if not, if we need to have a bigger conversation about what SEED looks like moving forward. So I think it's sort of a conversation to be continued. I think we fully intend to similar to last year, reach out to communities with areas of concentrated poverty, make sure they're aware of this program, and discuss how to make it palatable for them or of interest to them. But also just wanted to put the bug in your ear that we're having kind of even bigger evaluation questions about the SEED program as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember. Further questions or discussion at this point of Ms. Beard's presentation? Any further discussion? Okay, hearing none, Ms. Beard.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Greg, if we could move to the next slide, we kind of go down another layer into the onion of LCDA specifically, and the TOD program, which is a component of that. So back to the recommended total of base funding and staff reserve programming that we recommend, that's a total of 15 million. And as the previous slide shows, 10 million of that would go to the regular LCDA program and 5 million would go to LCDA-TOD. But as you're aware, both of those programs also offer pre-development funds, or kind of an up to this much is available for pre-development funds in both a spring and fall round. And so I mentioned earlier, we'd be talking about making more available for pre-development than we have in the past. And we're recommending twice as much as has been available for pre-development in the past. So $1 million in each program over the year. So 500,000 available in spring and 500,000 available in the fall for each LCDA and TOD pre-development funds. And that's really just a response to how important pre-development work is to really good projects and projects that further the goals of LCDA and Thrive. And just as we've tried to talk more to communities and developers about how to see more projects in our development programs that are competitive and achieving the goals that we want them to achieve, we are hearing more and more about the types of pre-development activities and the barriers to completing those pre-development activities. And so we really want to help quality developments come forward, quality applications come forward. There's so much rich pre-development work that can be done that can make the final project better, more equitable. And so we really want to try to encourage that and make more available for that. We frankly haven't been oversubscribed, for lack of a better term, in pre-development significantly in the past. So we definitely are aware of, like SEED, getting that much money out the door will require some staff effort and outreach, which we are planning to do. And then again, making that money available before the development recommendations are made allows us to continue to program that in development if we aren't successful or there simply isn't as much interest in the pre-development as we're hoping we can drum up. I'm going to stop there for questions about that.
Yeah, thanks, Tara. Questions from committee members?
Councilmember Chambliss?
Yeah, please.
That looks good. I can see the value of the increased support for pre-development funding. And as long as we, stay up to date on how well it's going, I'm excited about some new opportunities.
Cool. Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion? Questions for Ms. Beard? Hearing none, Ms. Beard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, our next slide, if you will, Greg, is just sort of a summary slide. This is kind of a lot, but it's also, I think each year, I know I'm getting a little bit more kind of familiar with it, and hopefully you all are too. But I wanted to just kind of summary the big picture here. So for TBRA, we'd be making the same total amount available as 2020, with slightly more made available to the SEED program. For LHIA, it is $500,000 less than 2020's funding availability, although last year was, of course, the most ever made available for LHIA in the past, and that's to maintain a modest level of reserves. And as I've stated, we'll also hopefully be supplanting that as well with maybe some strategic initiative funds. For LCDA, there's slightly more available than 2020. I think $500,000 more available than there was in 2020. in 2020 than in 2020. I think you all knew what I meant. I'm not sure I said those years right. And that's to allow for more pre-development and development funding. We did have a banner year of applications of interest last year. Our LCDA development applications were, if not an all-time high, certainly one of the highest years, of over 17 million in application requests for 9.5 million available. So trying to kind of acknowledge that while also allowing the program to remain competitive. And then for LCDA-TOD, it's the same total available as 2020, but more of that total is being made available for pre-development. So this is sort of that summary side. Maybe that is more helpful to Councilmember Lindstrom. If any additional thoughts or questions derive from this slide, let me know. Otherwise, we will move on from funding recommendations.
Questions? I think we can move on, Ms. Beard.
Great. So this is just sort of the what's next slide. You know, we'll take into consideration feedback from today, but I'm not hearing a ton of discord with what staff is leaning towards recommending, and that will be packaged for you on February 16th as the program scoring and funding availability criteria for the 2021 year. And that will allow us to make our notice of funding available. That will allow us to put our applications out and make them available in our program guides and allow people to start to get the information they need to be able to start putting together applications, and us to be able to do the technical assistance to hopefully get some of the applications that we want to see. So hopeful that I will be able to bring a package that y'all will see on the 16th that you can recommend to the full council to adopt, and then we will get busy with our 2021 work, getting the programs out there, getting the money out there, and as always, doing constant evaluation for more discussion and continuous improvement leading to 2022. I believe that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Beard. Questions on this part of the presentation? Comments? Any questions or comments?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, who is that? I'm sorry.
Judy, yeah.
Councilmember Johnson.
Johnson. Yeah, thanks. Tara, I just want to thank you. I mean, this is a boatload of hard work, right? You're really heading us in a better direction, I believe. I appreciate how many times, you know, there was a pause and a revisit and letting people engage, you know, and ask the questions and slowed it down, even though the pressure is still on to keep it moving forward, right, and get the dollars out where they can do good work. So I want to recognize you and your team, and you know, just again for doing some really heavy lifting and helping us get there along the way too. I have to tell you, in my heart, I want to give all the money away all the time. You know, let's get going, go. But I know that's not practical. But at the same time, you know, we recognize the emergency that's out there. And I have more questions, you know, for future meetings. But on this, I just give a great thank you, and I'll be supporting.
Thank you, Councilmember. Here. Other comments or questions for Ms. Beard? More comments or questions? Hearing none, again, just to add to Councilmember Johnson's thanks for you and your team. This is a lot of work, and we appreciate you bringing it forward in ways that we can really absorb it, discuss it, advise on it. So many thanks. And with that, we'll move on. Yeah, thank you. We'll move on to our final information item, which is the 2021 Community Development Committee Work Plan with Director Barajas. Welcome.
Thank you, council members, and I'll let Greg pull that up. Thank you. I was just, when you were calling me, I dropped my pen and was scrambling about to get everything set here. So just a short item in a continuation of our conversation from our January meeting where we discussed housing strategies. I wanted to come to, our team has been working really hard on our 2021 work planning that covers a whole range of items, and putting together the committee work plan that's part of our work for you, and getting your feedback on it today. So next slide, please, Greg. So just a reminder, I had shared this slide with you and the last time in January that I spoke with you about housing strategies that are part of the council strategic plan, and got really great feedback from all of you. So thank you. That was really helpful for us as we think about what rises to the top and if things go haywire, what we might be able to set aside just for the year so we can attend to our core work. So that triangle on the left really reflects all of the efforts and the way we approach our staff work planning and our division level work planning of all the things that we have to do, our core work, the things that we're required to do by federal or state statutes, our responses to local governments for their applications, whether it's comprehensive plans, plan amendments, parks, implementing agencies, master plans, all of those things we have to reserve time for so that we can be responsive within the required timelines that we have for those. Then implementation of direction from Thrive MSP 2040 is where we also look to ensure that we're tracking the things that we said we were going to do within our policy plans and from Thrive itself. And then all of the other additional council priorities. And this comes from your strategic plan in particular. So thank you for having that. Some years we're kind of guessing at what it might be. So it's nice to have a document that you all worked on to shape that. But also there are emerging trends and issues that come up from time to time and during the year. We try to capture as much of that as we can earlier in the year, but suffice it to say that our work plan is a living document that we do adjust throughout the year. So like I said, January, we spoke about housing strategies to really both report out on our progress on strategic plan efforts in 2020, but also to get your feedback on priorities for 2021. And today we're going to look at the big picture committee work plan, a little more whole cloth. And then at our next meeting, hopefully, if we have good discussion today and I get good direction, that we will look to finalize that work plan at our next committee meeting. Next slide, please, Greg. So you'll see that our work plan continues the organization. The business item has a full detail of this, but that we organize it under a regular business. The stuff that we already incorporate or do as part of our regular work. Those are the items that are in front of you on a regular basis. Those plan amendments, master plans, etc. And in our annual funding cycles, those are things that we're always doing. So we make sure that those things are covered. Our 2021 initiatives include new items for 2021 that are either from your strategic plan, they're just new initiatives as part of your priorities overall or council-wide initiatives, or are things that we don't do that often, maybe once every 10 years. And we'll talk about some of those here as well, but those include some of the regional planning efforts that you'll see. They're sort of regular work, but regular only once every 10 years type of work. So we call those initiatives or special projects. And then we have a number of information and regular information items and regular reports that we provide to as well to help build your foundation and understanding of the region as we undertake those longer range planning conversations and just report out on progress and other work that we're doing. And then the final item that we always like to reserve space for, at least space for the conversation, is related to having invited speakers or panel presentations related to the policy work that you're doing or things that you'd like to know more about. So our developers panel that we had at the Committee of the Whole, for example, in December is an example of one of those things about a very timely topic around how the development market is responding to the impacts of COVID. Next slide, please. So today I'm really going to focus on the initiatives and not so much on the regular work. We'll continue to do all the regular work. And so I'd love to get your feedback on the initiatives that we're doing and whether you feel like we're capturing the things that we should be capturing, if we're missing anything, or if you need additional information. So some of the initiatives that we have are listed under our regular business, mostly because they're very work unit specific, or they're parts of efforts that we do. Actually, they're very work unit specific, I would say. So the items that you remember us talking about include the Section 8 home ownership program that's in your strategic plan, And in the Family Affordable Housing Program, we'll be exploring an acquisition or disposition policy for the homes that we actually own. That was generated from discussion we had last year related to the potential to actually acquire a new home and add to our program there. But we didn't have a policy related to that and how we should act. So that was something that we will do some additional exploration with you this year, setting parameters on when we might consider acquiring or selling a unit within that program. Rounding out the 2040 comprehensive planning process, local governments are turning toward implementation, and to support that work, our staff will be building up an implementation program that supports local governments and includes trainings and workshops. We call that our Planet series. So you'll be hearing more about that later this year as well. In our regional parks units, these are items that were identified in the regional parks policy plan as part of their work unit and a work that we're getting underway. And then in research, we have another initiative to support local governments. If you've spent any time on our research section of our website, we have a very extensive community profiles page, so you can click on any community in the region and get detailed demographic information, housing, demographic, population, employment, all sorts of data for a particular community, a county, or a region. And we know a lot of local governments use this. We see it in both in their comp plans, but even in some of their local staff reports as well on items that have nothing to do with the council, but we know it's very helpful data. So we'll be doing some project scoping to update that as a resource. It's a technology and profile approach that was built, oh goodness, when I even started at the council, maybe over 10 years ago now. So it's due for some refresh, I will say. And there's a lot of connections that people would like to make to that as well. Next slide, please. And then in our overall 2021 initiatives, you'll see some continued efforts from 2020 that I've pulled out separately on the left-hand side here. Our staff have reported or talked to you about each of these items, and we continue to keep them on the top of our calendar as we continue to work on these items. And as we're ready to launch different items, we'll be bringing those forward. Some of these were delayed from 2020, like our regional parks visitor study. Because of COVID, we decided to delay this work until 2021. So we'll do doing that work this year and reporting out on what we learned from that. Our Solar for Vouchers program is another one of those that we launched in 2020, but we'd like to tell you more about in 2021 as we have a year's worth of work under our belt on that one. And then hopefully we have good news to share for you on some of our HRA applications in the mobility demonstration program and in the Moving to Work Authority that we continue to pursue. So we put those there as items that while they're continuations, they're still special initiatives that rise to the top of the priority level for us. And then new items that I wanted to bring to your attention on the right-hand side of the slide include issuing system statements. Because the council just adopted updates to the transportation policy plan and the regional parks policy plan, it's incumbent upon the council per statute to let local governments know about that officially through the system statement issuance process. So we'll provide an overview of what that looks like, what a system statement issuance looks like in this kind of mid-decennial cycle kind of update, and what it might mean for local governments, if anything, and what the overall process looks like. We also are expecting to, while we'll do population estimates every year, this year we, although delayed, expect to receive census data, which we get every 10 years. So it will be sort of a marker in the sand of where did we get to? Did we get to where we expected to get to by 2020? And what does this data look like? So this is one of those that we call a special initiative, but we do it every 10 years. So it's part of our regular work, but once every 10 years, it does give us a good marker of now this is where we're at and this is where we're going forward. Then we have a couple of additional research related projects that are on this list as well. Our residential preferences for program participants in our Housing Choice Voucher program is something that we haven't done in quite some time. We really want to survey what our tenants are looking for, what would really help them and what they consider when they're selecting homes and where they would like to live. It helps inform how we support them, how we consider what it means to have choice, and what it means to have program policies that support that choice. So we're in the process of doing that work, and we'll be reporting on that this year. Similarly, we have a broad partnership with the state, with DNR and Minnesota Parks and Trails Commission, Greater Minnesota, sorry, to do some broad analysis of visitation using location-based data like we've been using locally through Streetlight. We are getting funded through a grant through a different program for this, to do this research on behalf of the other agencies and also apply that to our own work. So really excited for that work this year. And then this is the year we also update our generalized land use inventory for the region. And as a geography nerd, this one always makes my heart pitter patter. But we do every 5 years fly some aerial photos and take snapshots of the region, and then turn those into maps of generalized land use, of how have we changed over the last 5 years. And we've been doing this for many years, but it gives us an idea of how our landscape has changed. And we can do some math around that too, and give you some high level themes that we draw from that data as well. Next slide, please. So I noted earlier that there are some council-wide initiatives as well that you'll hear about in Community Development Committee as they relate to the work of this committee and to our division. That includes some regional long-range planning efforts, digging into some more of our learnings from comprehensive plans, from the 2040 comprehensive plans, for example. We'll do some of that reporting out at the council-wide level at Committee of the Whole or regular council meetings, but some of that we'll do specifically follow-ups and digging deeper with you on items as it relates to perhaps through parks or housing or other very specific items to the Community Development Committee. We also have work on the Economic Values Atlas that is a follow-on to the Regional Economic Framework that we had done in 2020, and really digging into that and reporting out with you and getting feedback from you on that. Our climate action planning work is something that's also a council-wide initiative, but a lot of those conversations will be living at a council-wide table, but there may be items that we would like just your review and direction on, as well as we're building on that agency-wide climate action plan. And then, as we discussed at our last discussion in January, that we'll be exploring the use of council-owned land for affordable housing development, and that was one of those items identified in your strategic plan. This also will involve some work with real estate and with legal and some conversations at management committee as well. But we did want to note that some of those items about policy direction are related to housing and land itself will probably be conversations here at Community Development Committee, where some of the other conversations about barriers to use and some of those other elements would live at management committee. And then, of course, some additional, we have a number of information and reports listed on that are mostly regular items that we continue to track on. But I also just wanted to note, as I noted earlier, the composite and trends in 2040 comprehensive plans, especially as it relates to the community development work we'd be reporting here, as well as continued progress and feedback on our implementation of strategies in your strategic plan. So I just, next slide, please, Greg. I just downloaded a whole bunch of information on you and have a couple of questions for your consideration. And you can see a full listing of everything that we have proposed for our 2021 committee work plan in the business item that was, or I'm sorry, the information item that was posted today. But I have a couple of questions that help shape feedback on this plan, whether there are areas of policy that the committee would like us to discuss and clarify. One item, I'm sorry that I didn't note in my slides, but falls into this category, is related to secondary uses in regional parks and trails, or non-traditional uses. That was an item that we had heard from council members that you'd like to have discussion on, so we added it to our work plan. So that's an example of that first bullet. A second question, if there's any additional information or reporting that the committee seeks in order to better inform its work. And then finally, if there are any invited speakers or panel presentations that the committee is interested in to better inform its work. I should know, after taking all of your input, we'll be coming back at the next meeting with a calendar too that lays out both all of the regular business and special initiatives and reports across the year, so you can see when it all will fall and get a sense of when you might hear about especially the special initiatives. So thank you. I look forward to your feedback.
Thank you, Director Barajas. And so feedback on the questions that Barajas put forward. So are there areas of policy that the committee would like to discuss and clarify? Is there any additional information or reporting that this committee seeks in order to better inform our work? And finally, are there any invited speakers or panel presentations that the committee is interested in? And feedback for Director Barajas, please.
Councilmember Lindstrom has his hand up.
I'm sorry, Councilmember, I'm sorry, which one? I'm sorry, you didn't.
Lindstrom.
Oh, thank you, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I missed last month's meeting where you covered housing, so you may have covered this, but in our strategic plan, we talked about like toolkits and model ordinances for cities, and I imagine that's under the Planet work that you talked about. Is that right?
Councilmember Lindstrom, Mr. Chair, that it's in part, yes, the toolkits, ordinances, other support that we provide to local governments, we consider as part of our regular work, and not necessarily something that might be in front of the council for input or feedback or in front of this committee, but more something that we'll report to you on, and as part of the delivery, likely through the Planet series.
Thanks. I have a follow-up, Mr. Chair. So an extension of that in terms of a template, one thing that we had talked about a while back, and I think it got delayed because of COVID, is a climate action plan template for cities, not just our own climate action plan, which is fantastic that we're doing that. But is that still on the back burner? Is that being discussed as a possibility? And then the other thing, a separate topic, is the comprehensive analysis of long-term changes in green space and open space, which I think is on your docket or your to-do list as well. Lisa.
Yeah, Mr. Chair,
Thanks.
Councilmember Lindstrom, climate action plan template similarly is something that we are working with partners on as part of our support of technical assistance to local governments. And yeah, likely would be part of that, rolled out officially as part of that Planet implementation program. There's definitely, we've heard a lot of folks asking for, like, how do we get started on that? So we know that there are local governments looking for that sort of assistance. The comprehensive analysis of green space, definitely, there's a lot of land use pieces that will fall as part of that 2020 land use inventory. And certainly as we bring each of these items forward to you, what we learned from 2040 comprehensive plans, there's so much that we won't be giving you everything all at once. And even in the land use inventory, if there are additional questions that we haven't covered or that generate additional questions for you, each of those times that we are bringing those projects forward, I know our questions always will be, what else would you like us to look at? What else have we answered all of those questions? Because we want to be sure that you feel that you have the right information to help guide our regional planning work as well. So definitely your questions on that analysis of green space in the region is certainly part of our climate action planning work that staff are working on, and stuff that we're just curious about ourselves as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, this is
Thank you,
Councilmember Muse. Lisa,
Councilmember Mose.
thank you, Mr. Chair. Is it possible to invite Bruce Curry, a former City of St. Paul economic development chair? I think his work on, reducing economic disparity, it's really phenomenal work. Folks like him, I think will enrich our conversation.
Yep, Mr. Chair, council members, if you're interested in having special speakers, please ask if you have contact information that you could forward that to us and we can program that at an appropriate time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further feedback for Director Barajas. Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering if it might be useful to have a representative of the Itasca project give us an update on the housing affordability plan that was put together under Governor Dayton and kind of let us know where we are today.
Mr. Chair, council members, that's we certainly can follow up on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Chambliss.
Thanks. I can see that there was a lot of feedback and a lot of listening by staff throughout these last couple of years, and that's really appreciated, and seeing that in the summary. I liked the research pieces in terms of cultural profile, in terms of comprehensive plans. One thing I'd also like to see is a review of our underutilized business directory program, and maybe just looking at underutilized businesses. It's particularly important this year with the impact to businesses due to the pandemic especially. So I'd like to see us look into that and see if we can beef up that program and increase our opportunities for utilizing policy to do that.
Mr. Chair, on that point.
Yeah, please.
Thank you, Councilmember Chambliss. That's awesome. I serve on the management committee as vice chair, and with Councilmember Ferguson's leadership and the whole committee, we're really, to your point, all over that. And so we're leaning into it even more this year. So our work encompasses all of the spends, and we're tracking, we've set goals and we're tracking those. So, as it relates to community development, there's of course a portion of all that feeds to community development, but it'd be great too if any council members, in addition to what you're asking for, Councilmember Chambliss, when these items come up, especially when we're digging in and pushing, if you want to sit in on virtually or if we're in person, the management committee, it'd be great because it's we're seeing some progress, but there's more to do. But I'm just really encouraged, and I think there's a number of us on this committee that serve on that as well. So I just want to point that out and thank you. Thank you for that comment.
Thank you, council members. Further feedback for Director Barajas, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's nothing really talking about the changes with COVID and everything going on with all the disruption that we're having in the workplace, and the need for office space or less need for office space, the loss of commercial businesses that are probably never going to come back, and what to do as far as the redevelopment of all of those spaces that are changing needs. So I don't know if that's something that we'll have good information on yet this year, or if it's going to have to wait till next year, but we can't really go forward on our long-term planning without acknowledging the massive changes that we're facing.
Mr. Chair, Council Member Wolf, we actually were just talking about commercial industrial space this afternoon and changes in land use. And as we were talking about preparing our first conversation on trends and comprehensive plans for you, we wanted to give you a pre-pandemic look at what communities have been planning for in commercial industrial spaces. And how that's different from 2030 as a starting point for then what do we do now going forward as part of that regional planning conversation. So I think that's probably admittedly a little bit buried in the high level regional planning discussion, but certainly it's one of those items that we have pinned on our list already to look into. So thank you. I'm glad you brought that up.
Thank you. Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, I was just thinking while it's on my mind, and when Councilmember Johnson said that management committee was looking at the MCUB businesses. I think it would be good. I don't know if we should express an interest in some of these so that we could get advance notice of when it's coming up in one of the committees. Just something to think about, because it might help direct some of our efforts or our energy and participation.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, council member, I know as staff and our community relations specialists also are happy to help track things if there's a particular item that or topic area that you'd like to be sure you're not missing if it shows up in other committees, especially ones that you don't necessarily have membership on, that we certainly can be sure and share that with our colleagues, the CRS colleagues as well, to be sure that you aren't missing things that you're interested in, and we can ping you, so to speak, when those are scheduled.
Awesome. That's a great suggestion. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Councilmember Vento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilmember Wolf's comments sparked a thought in my head, and it's something that comes up typically in the middle of the night. So I'm glad you did that, Councilmember Wolf, because I wouldn't want you all to have to talk to me in the middle of the night. I'm curious as to whether there are opportunities and cities or regions that have, in addition to tackling the housing, also tackled the technology gaps that exist for many of our residents, whether it be an economic gap or a broadband gap, and how we might, going forward, think about how to make sure that the technological needs of our residents are met. I'm particularly concerned because if I've what we don't know about COVID in terms of long-term impact, and especially as it relates to people going to work and kids going to school. If folks are going to be working from home or learning from home, that technology piece is so an impact that has on families where those technologies aren't available. So I'm curious as to how we as a community development committee might explore that going forward. Thank you.
Director Ross.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Vento. I know that that is a topic of discussion at the legislature. It certainly is a statewide issue, and not just confined to rural areas either, but certainly with what COVID has shown us is that there's still a big gap even in the urbanized extent of our state. You know, it's not an area where I have a lot of experience, but certainly we can follow up and see if there is a role for this committee in that work. But I do know that it is a big topic of conversation at the legislature in this session.
Thanks, Director
believe
Ross.
it was- Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Nope, go ahead, please. Nope. Interrupt.
I was just going to note that I believe there was also some significant federal funding that was put into expansion of broadband across the state as well, but I'm not sure how far that extended into the 7-county metro area. I didn't look too closely at it, but I certainly can follow up and find that information.
Thank you. Councilmember Vento?
I was just going to add that Congressman James Clyburn from South Carolina, can you hear me? Okay. Congressman James Clyburn from South Carolina frequently refers to access to technology as being similar to access to electricity. It's the new utility that all citizens, all families, all businesses need. And it really is an issue here in the Indiana metro area. There are a number of areas out in broadband access. So whatever we can do, I think will be appreciated.
Thank you, Councilmember Vento. And I would just note, Director Barajas, that broadband issue kind of to what both Councilmember Cummings brought up with the greater MSP reporting. And my guess is that's something that they are interested in maybe tracking. And then also Councilmember Wolf with the sort of economic post-COVID economic sort of landscape. And so I think, yeah, it may be interesting. And I think you have heard from every single council member at this meeting. So thank you so much for
Mr.
your
Chair, I'm
oh,
really sorry.
Councilmember Johnson.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I made a comment, but I held back a couple of my thoughts. Just FYI, Prosperity's Front Door in March, you'll all be invited. We'll be reporting back out on the Governor's Task Force on Housing recommendations that were released under the Dayton administration in 2018, and we'll have our second year of updates to the trends around the 6 goals. All of them relate to the work that we do. It's a statewide report. Actually, I tap into some of the research at Met Council, so thank you. I really appreciate that resource. And also it'd be great to have iTask come, but also just know that we'll be working with iTask as well. And I think we'll have a joint program coming up in April. So I'll just make sure everybody gets all of that we're doing, because it's all housing related. And we are trying to integrate our reporting with everybody else's work as it relates to, disparities, equity gaps, opportunity, wealth building, and our progress or lack thereof on all of the important measures in housing. The other thing I would just like to say is, would it be possible that in some sort of report, through community development, we can track our progress on the things that I guess we control against our goal? So, the region needs X, and through regional needs in general, we're trying to accomplish Y, and the work that we're doing, I guess just some sort of measure on the impact that it's having, especially in the capital stack, that is needed to get some of these development proposals through. It just, I don't know. And then I've said this a lot, because we've got these big goals, is there a way to just measure, or whether it's through anecdote or some data that shows, because we changed this, or because we're doing this, we're seeing impacts against those high level goals. I just always like to, it's great to have goals and it's great to do the work, but it's really great to see how they connect and the impacts we make. So there's that. I think that's it for me, but thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. And I would note that Councilmember Atlas Ingerbritsen but blew a horn and threw confetti over your last suggestion, Councilmember Johnson.
Chair, this is Councilmember Atlas Ingerbritsen.
Yep.
And I just, maybe to verbalize my confetti, I just think that we'd like to, as a part of our work, get really clear about what are those outcomes, those big goals that we're seeing, wanting to make a difference in, and to have a scorecard or dashboard that help us track and be accountable. So at the end of the year, we can say we accomplished the things we wanted to. I don't think we need to have 50 billion things to measure, but I think we could say there are a few things that we're looking to do, and as a part of this committee, I think that'd be great. And it's always good to lead by example. So if these are things that we want the staff to be able to have clear metrics and measures, we should be willing to hold ourselves to the same standards.
Sort of committee report card. Comment, Director Barajas, or yep? Oh, Councilmember Johnson, was that you?
I forgot one thing, but I can step back if Director Barajas has something.
Mr. Chair, council members, totally agree. And that is work that we have actually been discussing over the last many months now, are both updating what we have online in our different dashboards, our housing policy dashboard, our Thrive dashboard, but also looking, I know in some of the work that Tara is doing as well, in livable communities is really showing that progress. We have to report on that every year to the legislature, but I don't know if we ever bring it to you. So those are things that we want to daylight for you as well as just showing just overall progress to those goals that we've already identified, whether it's in your strategic plan or in Thrive or housing policy or in our parks policy plan.
Thanks, Director Barajas. Councilmember Johnson.
Yeah, and thank you for allowing me to remember what I forgot. So again, as we move into 2021 and we're still, in these converging crises that we're going through, And as we still have eviction moratorium in place and forbearance in place to various degrees with lenders, but there's going to be a wave. And so in real time, there are going to be people falling through the cracks and falling into greater housing instability if we don't somehow preserve everybody's housing situations the way they are. And so as we go throughout this year, I just think it's really important to, during the crisis in the work that we're doing, how can we be nimble and fast? And I know Terry through the HRA is already doing a heroic job with our clients through the Housing Choice Voucher Program. But, especially then as we come back through it on the other side, there's just going to be a lot of rich data that we, we'll want to pay attention to. And as we all know, the disparities that are being exacerbated are with BIPOC and most notably with Black households. So, we know that's happening. So anything that we can do in the moment to counteract that and band together with others, and I know we are, we're going to be in for a tough year. Vaccines will roll out, but there's that other wave of crisis that comes behind this, and it's all about housing.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any further feedback for Director Barajas on the 2021 work plan? Any further feedback? I want to thank all the committee members for their engagement on this. It's very encouraging. Anything else you need from us, Director Barajas?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate all of the conversation today. It was incredibly helpful. And so at our next meeting, I'll have a calendar for you and some refinements in there to reflect the conversation we had today. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And seeing no further business before this committee, we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good week.